Hi guys, I welcome you all to the next lecture in our anthropology series. So yesterday we had started Culture Personality School and we had studied about Ruth Benedict and her work. This lady is Ruth Benedict. So today we are going to cover Margaret Mead. This is Margaret Mead, her contributions, and we will try to finish Abram also today, right? So let's get started. So yeah, basically yesterday we were talking about that Ruth Benedict, the works of psychology were now made an important part of societal studies. That means how societies and cultures are linked with human and their psychology. This was established by, this idea was given a nascent stage में ये Claude Lévi-Strauss के work में we had already seen, but by Ruth Benedict it was established कि there is a relation. She also tried to further do her study based on the connection between psychology and societal or cultural studies, right? So that is why the school is named as Culture Personality School, because then it is trying to integrate the psychology with culture, right? But there was a difference between Ruth's work and Margaret Mead's work. A very small difference, you can say, was that Ruth believed that individuals' personality shaped the cultures, right? Whereas Margaret believed that the culture shaped individuals' personality, right? While they were not contradicting each other, you can say together they were creating a more holistic and a very integrative kind of study. So ऐसा नहीं था कि Margaret Mead did not believe in what Ruth Benedict was saying. In fact, she tried to defend her also in many of her works. When Ruth drew only two kind of personalities, one was Apollonian and Dionysian. She was the one, when Ruth was criticized, she was the one to say that it's not only ki Apollonian or Dionysian are the only two personalities that people can have. You can draw many such personalities based on the culture that they live in. She just drew two, but you can make many other personalities. So she was in way defending Ruth's work, but then also she gave a different perspective, that how culture also affects individual personality, right? So together you can say they made the study a lot more holistic, because they talked about the interaction between culture and personality, right? One talked about how personality is affecting the culture, and the other talked about how culture is affecting the personality. So now let's start with it. She was also the student of Franz Boas, much like Ruth Benedict. Okay, her work was more ethnographic in nature. So she also kind of did a lot of ethnographic studies. She also did a lot of field work. Ethnography, I will again tell you, ethnography is a scientific kind of study of a particular tribe, race, ethnicity. आप कुछ भी बोलो, ethnicity का study, when you in detail you study them, right? You study their socio-cultural every aspect. You're not studying many ethnicities, but only one tribe, one kind of particular race or culture, and its detailed description, right? So by this time fieldwork had got massive importance in anthropology. We started with evolutionism, where they hardly did any fieldwork, right? Fieldwork ka concept came with Franz Boas, and then Malinowski and Brown were one of the pioneers who did a lot of fieldwork. They were functionalists. And then because Franz Boas ke student hai Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead and all of that, so obviously they will also focus a lot on the fieldwork studies, right? This also remembers me one of the quote that Margaret Mead said: in those times when she was doing her studies, she said now it is hardly possible to make anybody an anthropologist without sending them to the field. That means us time tak, the time when they were doing their studies, if you had not collected the data at its source, or you were not having authentic data, your study would not get any recognition, because by that time the data was very important, right? Authentic data was the most important for a uh, uh, for an authentic theory or any generalization, right? So they put in so much of importance on that. So she also did a lot of ethnographic, she had the ethnographic approach, but a thing which made her a little different from the others, just let me tell you that first. She pioneered the fieldwork, and the place where she did a lot of her fieldwork was Balinese, Bali, and then America. She did a lot of fieldwork there. But abhi tak, as of now, whatever fieldwork was happening na, there were only written records, only written matlab sources that were there. But she documented the Balinese character, and after that she wrote a book also on Balinese national character through visual anthropology. That means she took a lot of photographs, right? She created pictures, right? Motion pictures, still photographs. These were also the tools and techniques that she used when she was doing her research work or when she was doing her field work. So this made it gave a new perspective to anthropology, right? पहली बात ये हो गई. And then she was also considered as a role model for the women in America, because she encouraged them to pursue the careers closed for women at that time. This is roughly, you can say, the time of 1930s to 1940s, when there was World War also going on. ठीक है, you can say 1920, 30, 40s वाला time है. World War was going on, ठीक है. The world was opening up to a lot more new kind of concepts, ठीक है. The concepts of racism, the concept of ethnocentrism, all these things were a new you can say the bitter truths that were coming out now, ठीक है ना. Racism had been there, but the realization that it was wrong, right? Ethnocentrism, calling people with derogatory names such as savage were there, but then recognizing that this is wrong, these concepts were coming in. And then the concept like feminism, right? So all these things, even though feminism बहुत बाद में आया, but when World War had started off, all the men were across the countries, the men were going to the borders, and they were fighting the battle. So the women came out to work, right? And with Franz Boas encouraging women anthropologists like Margaret Mead, Ruth Benedict, they all brought in very female driven or female oriented perspectives to the studies, right? So that also gave a new energy to the subject, right? So she was a role model. She encouraged many women to pursue careers that were closed for them. She defended Ruth Benedict's works, right? She was interested in how different personalities emerge as a consequence of different cultural values. That means she was trying to see how culture affected the personality, right? And then she studied also mental health among Americans. At the time of World War, as I told you, when the food supplies were less and they were, whatever food supplies that were there, they were diverted for the people who were at war or actively participating there, and there were people who were not getting enough food, there were famines. So she studied the people and the mental health at that time, okay? So she did a lot of field work, she did a lot of studies. One is this Balinese national character. So this was the okay, so she did this Balinese national character studies, and she came up with a book which was named as Balinese Character, a photographic analysis. So this is one thing. Then another very important book was Coming of the Age in Samoa by Margaret Mead. Okay, so इतना समझ आ गया ना. फर्स्ट बुक आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट बैलिनीज कैरेक्टर, राइट. उधर फील्ड वर्क किया, यूज पायनियरिंग टेक्नोलॉजी टेक्निक्स लाइक फोटोग्राफी, राइट, मोशन पिक्चर्स. उसके थ्रू शी गेव द बैलिनीज कैरेक्टर. ठीक है, शी वॉज अप्रिशिएटेड फॉर इट. इट वॉज अ ground breaking work. The second book we are talking about is Coming of the Age in Samoa. Now in this book she pointed out a very very important thing, and it was really a very different take on the thing, because what happens is she compared two societies. One was the Samoans and the other were the Americans. Okay, so what she saw basically, इससे पहले in these two societies, her major field work or the age group that she was studying was the childhood, or you can say the adolescents, right. So you see, when there is adolescence, there is puberty. When children hit puberty age, there is a kind of stress and tension and conflict that builds in the children, right. And it was before this looked at with a biological perspective. That means it was thought that this adolescent stress or whatever changes, the very biological changes that happens in the time of puberty are because of the biological changes, and these are biological stresses. But when she studied these two contrasting societies, basically what she studied and what she saw, that in Americans, because the society at that time was a lot conservative, in the sense that at that time children could not indulge in sexual activities with each other, right. That was prohibited. ठीक है, the society was a lot conservative. That means the parents did not indulge in open environment, open kind of environment at home with the children. They did not talk about the bodily changes, and they prohibited such discussions, and they were put a lot of restrictions on the children, right. Because that time the children are bound to have a different kind of perspective towards life, right. They are in that so called rebellious mode, so they used to try and curb those tendencies in the children. Whereas in the Samoans, she saw a very very different kind of a behavior in the society. It was a lot more open kind of culture, in the sense that they allowed children even to indulge in the sexual activities. That means children were allowed to indulge in sexual activities. There was only one taboo, that was the incest. Incest was not allowed. Incest taboo was there. But apart from that, even if the children were indulging in sexual activities, they were allowed to freely meet each other, sing, dance, enjoy late nights. All of that, those things were allowed in the children. So they saw that adolescent stress in Samoan children was not there. So what she came up with is that अभी तक जो हम सोच रहे थे, whatever we were thinking as of now, that adolescent stress is due to biological changes or the changes happening due to puberty, it's not that. It is culturally determined. It is culturally determined because the society was a lot more open. They were trying to understand. They knew that these are biological changes and they are bound to happen. They did not put any restriction on the children. They were allowed to meet freely, indulge into sexual activities also, so that adolescent stress did not build in those children, in the children of Samoan community. So what she said, so she came up with a conclusion that isn't the culture affecting the personality. That means जो अभी तक हम सोच रहे थे that adolescent stress is due to biology and everywhere that kind of stress is there, but that stress is actually not due to any biological changes. That is because we have created a culture which is creating that stress in the children. So she came up with this theory that culture affects personalities. So this was the book Coming of the Age in Samoa, right? Then she came up with another book with the name called Sex and Temperament in Three Primitive Societies by Margaret Mead. Now this sex is not sexual activity wala, this means gender wala sex. Sex and temperament, how the gender and their behavior or personality in three different societies. So basically isme she studied three societies, Arapesh, Mundugumor and Shamboli. Okay, so I'll just tell you briefly about this also. Basically I'll just write, you can just check the spellings and the full names from the last page. I'll just write like, okay, I'll just write it only. Arapesh, Mundugumor and Shamboli. Okay, so these were the three societies which she studied, and she studied both the genders and their temperament, right? So she said in Arapesh society, basically they were very cooperative society. That means both the genders were very submissive, very docile, right? Very submissive and docile, not fighting at all the time cooperative with each other, and living with a lot of peace and harmony. Okay, whereas in Mundugumor, the both the genders were very aggressive. All the time they will quarrel with each other. Competitive nature, very competitive, jealousy, ego, competitive, jealousy, ego is there, right? And Shamboli, which was kind of, you can say, not kind of, but a matrilineal society. So in this, of course, because it was a matrilineal society, women were a lot more aggressive and assertive, whereas men were docile and submissive. So this is how she kind of concluded that how culture affects personalities, So there was a collective personality because matrilineal tribe hai, so women were a lot more assertive and men were docile. So this is how she came up with certain conclusions that how culture determines personalities, right? And she said that human nature is not rigid, rather it is a product of the culture. So I hope I have made you understand Margaret Mead and her work, right? So let's look at the criticism also. So basically she was criticized on the grounds that her work is a lot taken as short stories, because fieldwork, although she did fieldwork, but then the sample size was not that great. Okay, the sample size was very limited, like 40-50 people per society. So you can't generalize based on such a narrow sample size, right? So she was criticized on the fact that also generalizing based on such small sample size was one of the criticism. And then she also ignored the historical facts, matlab how the cultures are historically created, and then the economic factors, other factors like that, right? So let's try and finish Abram Kardiner also. He also furthered, see, culture personality school में अभी हमने Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead देख लिया, ठीक है? They both are trying to say culture and personality, influence each other, right, like that. So Abram Kardiner was another person who said that there is a basic personality type. Now what is a basic personality type? I'll just make you understand. In his book, which he and Ralph Linton wrote, The Psychological Frontiers of Society, he gave this concept of basic personality, right? Now let me just tell you what this basic personality type is all about. Okay, so now he said basically what happens is that see, culture personality school, you all would know, that is culture personality school and national character studies. These are very see, culture personality school did a lot of national character studies. National character studies means every nation collectively holds a similar kind of a personality, right? In Ruth Benedict's work, The Chrysanthemum and the Sword, right, they tried to draw upon the Japanese personalities, which were very like dualistic, right? Very sweet, very gentle, very humble in day to day life, but very aggressive at the time of war and all, right? So that was Ruth Benedict's work in The Chrysanthemum and the Sword. Then we saw Margaret Mead drew Balinese national character, right? So all of this culture personality school, so many people who have come, they have tried to show characters, national characters, right? So Abram Kardiner ने भी national character studies के बारे में बोला कि there is a basic personality type. In each nation there is a basic personality. For example, Indian culture में क्या होता है? Indian culture में there will be a joint family system. हम no matter today we live in a joint family structure or not, but that is integral to us, you know, that is something which is very integral to us. Our religion and faith is integral to us. Our respect for the elders is integral to us. The melting pot or secular character, you know, secularity, diversity is integral to us. So these are certain basic characters that all of us will uphold, right, as people of Indian society or culture, you can say, right? So in basic personality type, what Abram Kardiner was trying to say is that this basic personalities are built in a culture or society because there are similar practices that are there. For example, be it you can say Hindu, Muslim, Sikhs, Jain, Buddhist, any culture in our Indian civilization, they will all have similar child rearing activities. That means जब बच्चे बड़े होते हैं in the growing up years, you know, we kind of have similar character in the sense that if the parents are at work, nobody or very less people would keep their children at home. They will try and keep the children at the grandparents or some neighbors or some uncle and aunts, right, like that, right? So we have a culture where the children are grown up with a lot of connection with their grandparents, elders, cousins, neighbors, right? So similar child, and if the family is a Muslim family, for suppose, and the neighbors are Hindu, so they are going to inculcate Hindu values also, some, right? So we have this kind of culture. So that is what Kardiner was trying to say, that every culture, whatever it is, right, they have similar practices of enculturation. Enculturation is how you learn your own culture, right? Enculturation के similar practices होते हैं. The child rearing activities are the same. You know, your family structures mostly same ही होते हैं. Like you know, your kinship structures are the same. Like we value our relatives a lot, right? So any religion, any ethnic group in our country would more or less have a lot of relevance of family or relatives, like, right? So this is what he was saying, that there is primary institutions. Primary institutions क्या होते हैं? Family होता है, ठीक है, friends होते हैं, kinship होता है. These are primary institutions where our basic character is built. Okay, here our basic we take our basic personalities, and then there are secondary institutions, like mainly he talked about two: religion and politics. These are two secondary institutions where our personality is manifested. Okay, so what he said, that because there are similar practices in our growing up years, we are raised in a similar way, enculturated in a similar way, there are basic personalities that are built due to the primary institution, and these primary institutions are family, marriage, kinship, right? And these basic personalities are then manifested in the secondary institutions like religion, like politics. So this is what he said. So if you have to take an example, so you can take the example of sweatening practice. There is a sweatening practice amongst Russians. This is a old story only. So what they used to do now, when the child used to be in the cradle, so what they would do, they would tie the child very tightly, okay, so that it is unable to move. So with that, the child would develop very aggressive personality in the childhood only, because it is uncomfortable in that position, because it is tied so tightly, and it will try to get into a comfortable position. Because of that, it tries hard to get out of that uncomfortable position. So it makes the children very aggressive since the very beginning of their childhood. Although this is a very you can say derogatory to their culture, right? But at that time, again I say, the consciousness that these kind of generalizations are not good to do, but then they were ऐसे they would characterize at that time. So this was very derogatory kind of example, but उस time पे these kind of things were prevalent, right? So this is how they tried to show कि how similar personalities, जैसे हमने Japanese की भी बात करी थी, there were two contrasts that the children used to face in the very beginning of their life, right? पहले parents would love them like a tender, soft flower, and then in the adolescent age they were left on their own to earn for themselves, earn for their education also. So that made them a very dualistic kind of personality. So this is what Abram Kardiner was also talking about, that the way we do our enculturation, right, in the childhood, the similar child rearing activities in the nations, which in turn make common personalities among the children, not among the children but among the population itself, which he called as the basic personality type. And this is then gets manifested in the secondary institutions, which is the religion and the politics. And if any change is there in the primary institution, that is marriage, family, kinship, that will again be manifested in the secondary institutions. So it is saying कि primary में change होगा, तो it will be seen in secondary, right? And he said you need to study both to see how culture impact the collective personality. तो basic personality तो बन जाएगी primary institution से, collective personality बनती है both primary institution plus secondary institution से. And if you want to see the collective personality of an individual, then you need to study both of them, and this further builds the national characters, right? So I hope I have made my points clear. Tomorrow we are going to, I think Ralph Linton and Cora Du Bois is left now. So we'll try to finish it tomorrow, and by tomorrow we'll be done with Culture Personality School also. I hope you guys liked the lecture. If you did, guys, please like, share and subscribe. This is my humble request to you all. And guys, thank you so much.